It was the summer of 2003 in Tempe, Arizona. The desert heat lingered in the air even as evening approached, the sky burning orange as the sun dipped behind the mountains. For most residents, July 2nd was an ordinary day, marked by the familiar rhythms of work, family, and the anticipation of the long holiday weekend. But for one family on the quiet corner near Rural and Guadalupe Road, that day would mark the beginning of a mystery that remains unsolved more than 2 decades later. At 6:30 p.m., Patrick Servino, 54 years old, answered a knock at the front door of his home. Moments later, he was gunned down in cold blood. There were no arrests, no convictions, and today, more than 20 years later, the case remains a haunting mystery, a story buried beneath the silence of time. To understand the magnitude of this crime, we must first understand the man at the center of it. Patrick Servino was born in Jersey City, New Jersey. He grew up with East Coast grit, in a place defined by tight neighborhoods, working-class values, and the hustle of city life. But in 1974, at the age of 25, he left New Jersey behind and moved west to the Phoenix metropolitan area. Arizona in the 1970s was rapidly growing, attracting workers, families, and dreamers chasing opportunity in the desert. Patrick was among them. He found work with the Salt River Project, a major utility company providing water and power across the Valley of the Sun. It was stable employment, the kind of job that built security for a young man seeking roots. Patrick would make Arizona his permanent home. Those who knew him described him as a dependable man. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. Instead, he devoted himself to work, his church, and his family. Patrick's personal life was marked by love and by tragedy. For years, he was married to Anna, his first wife. Anna had battled complications from childhood polio for much of her life, but despite her struggles, the two shared a strong bond. In January 2002, after years of hardship, Anna passed away. Patrick was devastated, but life pressed forward. In March 2003, just over a year later, Patrick remarried. His second wife was Barbara Jean Giddis. For Patrick, 2003 should have been a year of new beginnings, a chance to heal from grief and step into the future. Instead, it became the year of his violent and mysterious death. To many, Patrick's life appeared ordinary. He worked. He cared for his home. He looked after family, including his ex-mother-in-law, who was blind and lived with him at the time of his death. But in the months before the murder, something unusual began happening. Someone had targeted Patrick. Strange acts of vandalism began around his home. On more than one occasion, someone spray-painted accusations across his property. The words read, "P.S. sells drugs." The bold, red letters stood out against the walls of his house. A direct attack not only on Patrick's reputation but also on his safety. Then came another escalation. A rock was thrown through his window. To neighbors, these seemed like acts of harassment, maybe the work of a neighborhood troublemaker. But to Patrick, they carried a deeper menace. Despite the public accusations, Tempe detectives would later state clearly, there was no evidence that Patrick was ever involved in drug activity. He was active in his church, had no criminal history, and lived a quiet life. So why would someone target him? This question became even more pressing when he was killed just weeks later. The day of the murder began unremarkably. The July heat was relentless, as it always was in Arizona summers. By evening, temperatures still hovered above 100 degrees. Inside the Servino home, Patrick was caring for his blind ex-mother-in-law. Barbara, his new wife, was not home at the time. At around 6:30 p.m., a knock sounded at the front door. Patrick went to answer. What happened next unfolded in mere seconds. As Patrick opened the door, gunfire erupted. He was shot and killed in the entryway of his own home. No one saw the shooter. No clear suspect was identified, and the neighborhood, normally quiet, residential, and safe, was left in shock. Neighbors spoke of hearing gunshots but couldn't provide a description of the killer. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles fleeing the scene, no strangers spotted lingering nearby. It was as if the shooter appeared, struck, and vanished without leaving a trace. The Tempe Police Department opened an investigation immediately. The case should have drawn wide attention. A respected local man murdered at his own front door, broad daylight still lingering, no arrests made. But strangely, after an initial burst of reporting, the case seemed to slip into silence. Detectives began with obvious questions. Who would want Patrick Servino dead? The vandalism seemed to offer a clue. Someone had spray-painted PS Sells Drugs on his home in the months before the murder. Was this connected? If so, was it a neighbor who truly believed Patrick was involved in crime? Or was it someone attempting to smear him, setting up a cover story for what was to come? Police found no evidence that Patrick was ever involved in drug sales or criminal activity of any kind. The graffiti accusations were unfounded, but the timing made it difficult to ignore. Theories emerged. Could Patrick have been the victim of a disgruntled neighbor, angry over some unknown dispute? Could he have been targeted by someone connected to Barbara's past? After all, he had remarried only months before his murder. Or was this a case of mistaken identity, someone attacking Patrick under the false belief that he was someone else, or that the accusations spray-painted on his home were true? One question lingered above all others. Was this random violence, or was Patrick deliberately marked for death? Despite these avenues of inquiry, the case quickly stalled. Police never named a prime suspect. There were no arrests. No charges were filed. The murder weapon was never recovered. Witnesses were scarce. And in the days after the shooting, no one came forward with information strong enough to move the case forward. The family was left to grieve without answers. Barbara, Patrick's second wife, would live only 7 more years after his death. She passed away in 2010, without ever knowing who killed her husband. Today, more than 20 years later, the investigation remains under the oversight of Silent Witness, a Maricopa County program that allows tipsters to provide information anonymously. But no breakthrough has come. With so little official information, theories about Patrick's murder remain speculative. One possibility is that Patrick was targeted by a disturbed neighbor. The graffiti and the broken window could have been the acts of someone with a personal grudge, escalating over time until violence became inevitable. Another possibility is that the murder was connected to Barbara's past. Could an ex-partner or someone with unfinished business have lashed out? Then there's the possibility of mistaken identity. Patrick may have been caught in the crossfire of a rumor, killed because someone believed wrongly that he was involved in drugs. The timing of the graffiti, the vandalism, and the murder makes it difficult to separate coincidence from connection. But perhaps the most haunting question is this. Was this a planned hit, carried out with precision and silence, designed to eliminate Patrick without leaving evidence? If so, by whom? And why? One of the most troubling aspects of the Servino case is the silence surrounding it. After the initial reporting in the East Valley Tribune in 2003, the case all but disappeared from public attention. There was no sustained media coverage, no national headlines, no investigative exposés. For nearly 2 decades, Patrick's name rarely appeared in print. For his family and loved ones, this silence was another form of injustice. It meant that Patrick's death slipped from public consciousness, his case languishing in the shadows. Even today, his story is scarcely known outside of Arizona true crime circles. To understand the investigation's challenges, we must place the case in context. In 2003, forensic science was not what it is today. DNA testing was in use but not yet widespread. Gunshot residue testing, fingerprint analysis, and ballistics could provide clues, but only if the evidence was available. In Patrick's case, the killer left little behind. Tempe was also growing rapidly at the time. The Phoenix metro area was one of the fastest expanding regions in the country. Police resources were stretched, and cases could easily be overshadowed by others with more evidence or higher visibility. And then there was the stigma of the graffiti. Even though detectives stated Patrick had no connection to drugs, the public image of his home being tagged with accusations may have shaped how the case was perceived, making it harder to rally sympathy, harder to generate attention. Today, the murder of Patrick Servino stands as a reminder of how fragile justice can be. Here was a man with no criminal record, a devoted worker, a man of faith, a caregiver to his blind ex-mother-in-law gunned down in his own home, and still, 2 decades later, his killer remains free. His story reflects the vulnerabilities of ordinary people. It shows how rumors, harassment, or even misidentification can escalate into violence. It highlights how some cases, despite the tragedy they represent, slip into silence when attention fades. For Patrick's family, the pain never truly ended. The questions remain unanswered. The justice never delivered. And for Tempe, the case lingers as a cold shadow in the community's history. The desert remembers. The walls of Patrick Servino's home once bore the false accusations of vandals. The neighborhood streets once echoed with the gunshots that ended his life. But the truth, the identity of his killer, the motive behind the attack, the reason why justice has not been served remains hidden. Was Patrick the victim of a deranged neighbor? A personal grudge? A mistaken identity? Or was his death something darker, a deliberate, calculated hit? 20 years have passed, and the silence only grows deeper. This is the story of Patrick Servino, a man taken too soon, a case left unsolved, and a reminder that behind every statistic, every headline, every cold case is a human life, a family left grieving, and a community haunted by the questions that refuse to fade.